Welcome, everybody. It's great to have you in the Mitchell Center and to have you joining our Sustainability Talk series. My name is David Hart. I'm the director of the Mitchell Center. So now it's my pleasure to welcome Suzanne MacDonald from the Island Institute. And I first want to say that if you look at the vision statement for the Mitchell Center, it actually talks a lot. It's actually not very long, but it talks about the importance of connecting knowledge, the kind of stuff that gets produced in universities and other places in society, with action, connecting knowledge with action, because it's not enough to produce the knowledge. You got to use it for something, and hopefully you use it in a way that improves the world. And not all universities do that really well. I know because I've been at a number of them, and some don't even have it as really a core mission. But this one does. And there are a lot of organizations inside universities and outside that do this really well. At our university, Sea Grant does this every day. They kind of link research with real world solutions. Same for cooperative extension. It's one of the things the Mitchell Center does. And we're very fortunate today to have someone from the Island Institute, which has been doing this kind of work for decades, and they're really good at it. Suzanne is the Chief Community Development Officer at the Island Institute. So among other things, she oversees the development of the Institute's programs with focus on climate, economic resilience. She led a lot of the Institute's programs on community energy, especially with island communities, maybe not surprisingly given their name, not just in Maine, but in New England and beyond. I began to have the pleasure of working with her in conjunction with the work that the Climate Council did in Maine beginning a few years ago. She was very actively involved in that on the Buildings, Infrastructure, and Housing Working Group, and she had colleagues at the Island Institute that were involved in other working groups. And when Linda Silka and I and Sarah Kellerman were invited by the Governor's Office of Policy and Innovation in the future to lead a big equity assessment of the State Climate Action Plan, we had the pleasure of working with Suzanne and others because she was on the Climate and Equity Advisory Committee, and now that work continues to this day. So we're lucky to have Suzanne with us. Island Institute is a great place and she does great work there. The title of her talk today is Navigating Change, Strategies and Structures to Increase the Resilience of the Coast of Maine. Welcome, Suzanne.
Thanks, David. Thanks very much. It's really nice to be with you all today. I'm sorry that I'm not able to be in person, but appreciate the Mitchell Center's invitation and this hybrid format to keep us all comfortable and maybe even cut back on some vehicle miles traveled. Yeah, I guess let me pull up my slides before I get too far into this. I just want to express I'm really pleased to be with you all today. I think in thinking about this presentation over the weekend and realizing about all the change that there is to navigate in the world, where we thought we would be a week or two ago and where we are today, watching the news unravel over the weekend, and just I think there's a lot of emotion to see what's happening globally, let alone locally, with the issues that we have in our own backyard. I thought about the Ukraine and the horrors that are happening there and how to relate that to this talk. It's a pretty tall order, but I do obviously want to acknowledge what's happening there. And then this morning, as I was getting ready to come into the office, and I don't know if you all get these notifications on your phone, I get them from the New York Times with the headlines from the latest climate assessment, the IPCC 6th assessment, and the news, pretty concerning news about where we're at on the climate situation. These are big things happening in the world around us. And in some ways, when we think about the coast of Maine, it's really easy to feel small and inconsequential. But in some ways, I feel like the place-based work that so many of us are concerned about and care so much about is almost more important. Oftentimes, some of the conflict we see in the world does come down to place, and it certainly does come down to relationship. And our ability to navigate through some of the world's most challenging situations like climate change, absolutely. I believe the solutions for that are going to be rooted in place and in relationships. And so I'm excited for the opportunity to talk with you all. I think current and potentially future change makers on the line. I'm imagining we've got students, and I see some colleagues in the professional space and some community members, even an Island Institute board member who's here, and I'm sure we'll be able to share her perspectives as well. I think as we think about change, what I want to be able to do today is make some space for us all to think about, how do we affect change? What does it take to affect social change? I think too often we live in a world that looks for sort of technical understanding. What are the issue areas or technical competencies that you have? For me personally, having been in the space of needing to know everything about clean energy and clean energy transitions, to be able to calculate kilowatt hours to BTUs and understand energy savings and capacity factors, I think sometimes our academic systems and our professional experiences oftentimes focus on the what. At the Island Institute, my practice here and the organization itself has done a lot in the last several years to think not just about the what in terms of the change that's affecting the coast, but the why and the how. And so I think for all of us today to be able to take a step back, of course, I want to share with you a little bit more about our work concretely, but what is the role of place-based work? What is the role of relationships? And what are some of the structures and strategies that we might use in our own practice and within our own organizations to be able to affect change in a more durable way and perhaps in a faster way? There's a lot of tensions at play here, and I think we'll be able to talk about some of that today. So I've never given a talk on this focus of our work, actually. I think I'm so used to talking to people about what we do on sea level rise or how we might make homes easier to weatherize. Today, we're going to talk about some of the nuts and bolts and kind of go behind the curtain a little bit here. And so if I'm a little clunky in how I express this, thanks for your patience, but I hope it will still be of interest to you all as well as change makers, trying to give you some more tools in your toolkit to think about. So, Island Institute, some of you, I'm sure, have great understanding and familiarity with the coast of Maine. You may live here, and perhaps you're even familiar with the Island Institute's work. The organization is based in Rockland, and we've been around for quite some time, almost about 40 years. And we are a staff of about 55 folks who work across a number of different issue areas related to what we consider to be community development. We are here to increasingly partner with not just the year-round island communities here in Maine, but all coastal communities. And we really seek to collaborate closely with other partner organizations, policymakers, regulators, philanthropists, other folks who have interest in affecting change on the coast of Maine and helping it to continue to be the special place that it is to live and work in today. We are really focused, I think, on more so than ever before, this concept of how we navigate change. We recently, with our board, went through a strategic planning process, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on, where really we are trying to focus all of the organization's work around bringing greater capacity to communities along the coast to navigate change. We share an understanding or sort of a belief that the pace of change and the complexity of change that's affecting the coast of Maine, like many places these days, is only going to increase as time goes on. And so when we sat down to come up with a strategic plan, we realized that this would have to be an approach unlike those that we've had in our past 40 years, that we needed to find new ways of doing things in a highly volatile and dynamic environment. And this was even before the pandemic struck. And so I think this idea of change and complex change and disruption is just something that's becoming something that is really a focusing framework for all of us at the Island Institute. Currently, we try to focus our efforts in 3 core areas, although very purposely these areas are intersectional, and we are really seeking to kind of all ladder up to that concept of supporting island and coastal communities to navigate change. So our 3 areas of focus right now are creating climate solutions, building more resilient economies, and enhancing strong leadership along the coast. Within the climate work, this is work that currently focuses both on the mitigation or the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, as well as the adaptation side of things, where we're working with communities and businesses to both look at their use of fossil fuel-based energy, as well as their ability to adapt primarily to coastal flooding, sea level rise, and issues with water quality. This is something that we look to make very specific place-based investments. We, look for where there is leadership and interest locally to develop these solutions, and then work to make sure that we can implement projects. This has ranged from some of the energy efficiency work that we did probably 10 years ago, where we brought weatherization services out to the most remote islands to help weatherize 20% of all of the year-round islands' population. This was previously something that islanders had very difficult times accessing contractors and the rebates available by organizations like Efficiency Maine and USDA, simply because of the travel logistics of being too difficult to go out and bring equipment out to the middle of the ocean. At the same time, many island communities pay some of the highest energy costs in the entire state and certainly the entire country as well. And so it's been great for us to play a role in helping to close the gap on issues like energy efficiency. We've also supported efforts around community and business-owned renewable energy, and increasingly are working with municipalities and businesses, primarily wharves, to plan for rising sea levels. We take these place-based investments and do what we can to make it the lessons available to communities up and down the coast. So there are 152 island and coastal communities in Maine, and it's difficult for us to be in all of them at any given time. And therefore, we look for opportunities where we can share what one community is learning with others. You go to our website, you can learn about the planning process that Vinyl Haven Island is going through in terms of sea level rise in our Climate of Change series. And then we are quite active across all of our work at the Maine State Legislature and in Washington, D.C. to try to see how federal and state policy can help unlock more opportunities as well. So as I said before, we do have a real focus on the islands in this work because of their vulnerabilities and high costs of energy. We're particularly focused on looking at opportunities for the marine economy in the state to be able to adapt as a particularly an industry that's particularly dependent on both shoreside infrastructure and fossil fuels for energy, and then looking to partner with our municipalities as well and looking into ocean-based solutions, particularly around ocean acidification remediation. Another part of our work focuses on building more resilient economies here along the coast, both at the local and sort of regional level. We realize with all of this disruption and change that we have key sectors that are sort of core components of our coastal economy and culture, as well as individual businesses that we're seeking to play a role in helping them to become more prepared for climate, economic, and social related disruption. Part of this has to do with diversifying our economic activity, particularly in areas where there might be a pretty significant reliance in one type of activity over another. So we've definitely done a fair amount of work to look at the lobster industry and opportunities to diversify incomes for lobstermen and women, perhaps by getting into seaweed and shellfish related aquaculture ventures as something that they have equipment, oftentimes have the equipment and sort of the skill set for, and creates a little bit of, helps to reduce some of the variability that they might see in their incomes over the course of a year. Broadband access to high-speed internet is a part of this strategy as well. We've been working really hard since 2014 to first focus on the year-round island communities, and now with coastal and other communities across the state to really enhance access to affordable broadband service. And we're able to leverage our Tom Glenn Community Impact Fund, which is a great resource that we have to both support communities and businesses to plan for infrastructure-related projects, as well as to make financial investments in the businesses as well. The last core area of our work is around social resilience, or empowering local leaders. One of the things that we know, Maine is the most rural state in the nation. 61% of our population lives outside of population centers, and along the coast and on the islands, particularly north of or east of Portland, we have very small communities. So 75% of our coastal communities have fewer than 3,500 people. 25% of them actually have fewer than 750 people. And so in terms of the number of people and hours in the day to solve some of the same complex problems that cities along the East Coast are grappling with, in some ways you could consider us as a disadvantage. We're working pretty hard to find the opportunity in that, but being able to invest in both current leaders and future leaders, our younger generations, to be prepared and ready to engage in leadership positions within their communities is a really core piece of our work. We do seek to bring technical assistance to community leaders and educational opportunities. And one program that perhaps you've heard of is called the Island Fellows Program, where for those of you who are wrapping up with your undergrad or graduate studies, I definitely encourage you to check out our website. The Island Fellows Program is 2-year service-related projects where you live and work within a community along the coast and really get to roll your sleeves up and engage in some work that I think is pretty far beyond the sort of typical entry-level work experience. So definitely check out our website if you'd like to be a part of this social resilience work that we're investing in. So I said I wanted to talk about some strategies and structures that we're using. So what are the ways that we are hardwiring our work to help the coast and the Island Institute staff to help communities be prepared for change? We've talked a lot internally around how do we define community development. For those of you who may be studying it, I'm sure you're familiar with lots of different definitions and approaches, some that feel sustainable and durable and some that don't. I actually have my undergraduate degree in international development and really wrestled with this idea that the field itself, I think, has come into a lot of criticisms over the years for having sort of a top-down, sort of almost colonizing like approach to it that has felt really uncomfortable in terms of imposing what you might think as the answer on other communities and populations. At the Island Institute, we are really focused on building lasting local capacity and creating the environment and the situations for community members, our quote unquote partners, to be able to access the information, resources, support, and relationships that they need to get done what they need to get done in their communities. We oftentimes feel like we're in this place of privilege, being sort of at the hub of the wheel and being able to connect communities to other resources and each other. I often say that when somebody calls me at the Island Institute, it's not because they're seeking my advice, guidance, or sort of quote unquote answers, but rather because there's somebody that I know that knows what they're experiencing and that they can probably learn from and provide and get some support from. This idea of connecting with folks who have had lived experience, who have walked in the shoes, who know the need for practical, on the ground, really durable solutions is one of the really special things that I think about the Island Institute is our role just to be able to be a connector. We think really hard about facilitation of discussions, facilitation of process, and this question of how do we have meaningful connections in our time together? How do we get what we need and not feel like we're wasting each other's time with a bunch of Charlie Brown parent presentations with PowerPoints, but actually really get to the crux of the matter and get answers. We, I think, try to ask the question of who's not at the table and what might the barriers to being at the table look like. Who might be inadvertently left behind from community process or not able to benefit as fully from community-based projects. And I think in some ways, as the world has worked as many in the world, not all, but as many have worked to begin to do a better job of centering the concepts of equity and inclusion. I think that this experience that we've had on the ground has helped us to be particularly attuned to some of these questions. While there's certainly still more work to be done on that front, I think we can see some of these impacts a little bit more clearly, particularly within small communities. It's also important for us in our work to make sure that we're open to the solutions that can emerge from these processes. As an organization, we don't really consider ourselves as an advocacy organization per se. We don't think of ourselves as experts coming with prescriptive solutions and saying, you know, we've got a white paper on that, and that's the answer to that problem. We really believe in solutions being unlocked from the work on the ground and getting the right people in the room to compare notes on things. And that really amazing things can emerge when you just create the space for, you know, the smartest person in the room is the room. I think we've been able to see a lot of really fascinating and sort of durable solutions emerge when we're not necessarily trying to put our own answer out there first. The last thing I'd say is that it takes a lot of patience to do this work. This idea of investing in place-based approaches, maybe you've heard about that in the news. I know certainly with the new federal administration, there's a lot of discussion about place-based partnerships and place-based initiatives and community-based partnerships. And every time I turn around, it's kind of like, whoa, they're speaking our language. What's going on here? It's really exciting to see increased focus on these types of partnerships, both because I think benefits can flow more equitably that way, and there's just more opportunity, I think, for more durable impact. But it takes a long time. When people are doing other things and there are competing priorities within community, you need to be patient. But I think what we find is that in building deep relationships and really listening about what the priorities are, you can find opportunities for incremental change along the way. So I wanted to share this quote on that note. The Island, my colleague, former colleague at the Island Institute, Rob Snyder, was our president for several years, shared some thoughts. He always used to talk about social change and how long it takes, and that when somebody says it can't be done, it will take about 12 years to do it. Social change is slower than grant cycles, the terms of board members, and the terms of most NGO staff. The problems we seek to solve can change as we solve them, and we need to be prepared to change along the way as well. And so I just wanted to share that because I think that's true. I've been at the Island Institute for 13 years, and I can say, as many of you who live and work along the coast of Maine and wherever you may be from, that change can take a long time. You might see some of those outcomes in the early years, but to see really durable, long-lasting change, it can take a while. So I just want to juxtapose that for a moment with the news and the headlines from this morning in the IPCC report. Do we have 12 years for this change that we're looking for here? No. And so what I hope is that through the rest of the conversation, we can think about ways in which we can start to accelerate change through place-based approaches and building relationships, to be able to see when we need to pivot more quickly, when we need to progress through issues more deeply. How can we do that? Particularly on these complex issues where we don't always all agree. And as I said, we might not have all the resources we need to solve those problems. So what I want to do next is go through a couple of different examples of our work. And they're pretty different examples, but hopefully will be of interest to you. And just to give you a sense at how some of these community development strategies that we use play out over time. The first has to do with our transportation systems, particularly the ferries that serve the islands off the coast. This is a picture of one of the ferries from the Maine State Ferry Service that serves some, but not all of our island communities. It's interesting, a place like the Island Institute, in some ways you might think should be all over the idea of supporting ferry service to the outer islands. But for many years, our strategic plans weren't focused around a sort of kind of specific issue like transportation. We focused on education. We focused on economic development. We focused on clean energy. And this sort of specific set of issues around going to and from islands didn't rise to the top in terms of an issue that we actually had staff focused on. And so oftentimes we were in a situation where we would be reactive to an issue of a ferry operator serving one community or another. Things happening at the legislature. It was sort of reactive, and sort of these big hotspots would emerge, and we'd try to jump in off the corner of our desks for somebody to try to address these issues. The pandemic changed that, and ferries, as the lifelines to our island communities, were really struggling to keep up with COVID guidelines, to have regular service, to make sure that food and medical equipment could get out to islands in regular ways, that there was enough staff to run the boats. And so the Island Institute started to convene ferry operators from all of the different ferries serving the islands, and some of them large, like the Maine State Ferry Service, some of them very small, like the Isle Ho Boat Company serving Isle Ho. And we didn't come with a particular answer or solution. We just created the space for operators to be able to speak directly with each other, to get information flowing, and to make sure that they could hear the latest information that was coming out of the state and the federal government, and be aware of any resources that could be helpful for them. In going through these opportunities, we met quarterly. We've been meeting quarterly since spring 2020. It allowed those relationships to build, not just between the operators themselves, but with our staff as well. And we had the chance to listen more deeply to some of the challenges, not just related to the pandemic, but more broadly as well. And what that started to do was to unlock some new opportunities for us to invest in addressing not just the pandemic related issues, but some of these systemic related issues. We're pretty excited at this point that some of the actions that we would oftentimes be so reactive to, like the Maine State Legislature, which funds the Maine State Ferry Service, at times had directed budget cuts or operational changes, that we've now built a relationship that's quite close, I think, and productive with the State Ferry Service and the island communities served by them, that we're actually co-investing in a pretty significant study to re-envision what the service could be. How can we make a more durable service that can continue to be affordable to island communities, that can not break the state budget, and can take into consideration things like alternative propulsion and electrification of vessels as well, to reduce some of the carbon footprint of the operations, and ideally cut down the costs as well. So by building relationships and creating the space for collaborative problem solving, we've now launched a pretty significant endeavor that will take us through the end of the year, that ultimately at the end of the day will give us that sort of more systemic approach to solving some of these problems, at least for the islands served by that ferry service, that I think everybody, generally will feel bought into and a part of, as opposed to the Island Institute coming in and sort of telling folks how it should be done. I wanted to share another example of some of the work that we've done around offshore wind, which is an issue that's been discussed here in Maine since 2008, and there's been discussion since 2009 around the development of a small project off of Monhegan Island, which is one of the communities that we work closely with at the Island Institute. Throughout that process, there were a lot of questions on all sorts of things. What would this project mean for the fishermen off of Monhegan and the folks who fish beyond that space? What would it mean for the community in terms of the impacts of having the turbines close by? Would there be impacts from noise or shadow flicker? Would there be impacts to the marine environment? Could power come from this turbine to help power the island community? And really, what was the best way to be able to get a seat at the table and to be able to talk with the proponents of the project and understand what was going on when you're a community of about 50 people in the wintertime? One of the greatest things that we were able to do in this space was that we were fortunate enough to be able to look to our south and to southern New England off of Block Island in Rhode Island and Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket. These communities had been grappling with the same questions at the same time, maybe just a little bit ahead of the folks in Monhegan. And so for several years, we were able to facilitate trips to each other's communities. And this was in 2018, after the turbines had actually been installed. These islanders from Monhegan and Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, and Block Island, who at this point had been together many times, had the chance to be able to go out and see the turbines firsthand themselves. They were able to sort of take pages from each other's playbooks in terms of how to get the community's voices heard. They were able to support each other in negotiating community benefit agreements and working with policymakers. And so I think, it was just great to be able to play that connecting role and see how communities could identify their interests and needs, and then for us to play a role in connecting them to the resources that they need. The last example that I want to share is a piece of work that the Island Institute has been a part of for almost 15 years called the Fishermen's Climate Roundtables. And I swear I didn't know that one of the people in this photo is actually joining us today, but it's really great to have him here. So Fishermen's Climate Roundtable is essentially an informal group of about 20 to 25 fishermen who get together each year, generally around the Maine Fishermen's Forum, to talk about the changes that they're seeing on the water over the years. It's also an opportunity not just for them to speak deeply with each other, but to leading scientists on a particular topic related to fishing and to climate change. The topics that are dug into each year are selected by the participants, by the fishermen, and making sure that the discussion is meaningful to them. And it's really exciting for, I think, everyone in the room to be able to hear the individual perspectives add up to create a much larger perspective on the change that we're seeing out on the water in the Gulf of Maine. I had a colleague say to me, it's like everybody's describing a piece of an elephant. Somebody's describing the trunk and somebody's got one of the big flappy ears. And at the end of the conversation, you can see the elephant in the room, which sometimes is climate change. But this has led to so many other pieces of work, both by the Island Institute and the scientists and fishermen in the room, looking at the changes that we were seeing in ocean chemistry several years ago, and being able to launch some research and state level policy work around ocean acidification, in part was informed by these conversations. Discussions about the need for economic diversification, particularly around the season in 2012, the warmest year on record, and the disruption that was seen there really outlined the need for diversifying incomes and working on business models to be able to adapt to the change that folks are seeing on the water. And I think increasingly in the last few years, recognition of sort of the carbon dependency and the use of fossil fuels in the industry, the opportunities for both investing in energy efficiency, clean energy, and shoreside infrastructure, and those cool electric trucks that are coming, as well as longer term discussions around what does it look like for alternative propulsion on the water? Can we have diesel electric hybrid lobster boats or electric outboards? So I think it's been really exciting to see what that format has helped to unlock. So for the last part of the presentation, I just wanted to give you a little bit of insights. Those are some of our strategies and how we work with our partners. I wanted to give you a little bit of an insight into some of the changes that have happened at the Island Institute in the last few years, about how we're trying to actually change the way we operate internally to be prepared for this concept of change. And so for the last 4 or 5 years, we've done a lot of work, oftentimes very hard work and not always easy or successful work, but we've tried really hard to take this concept of change and to say, how do we make our organization ready for this? How do we have a structure and a culture that is prepared to be able to respond to the change, and that relates to the quote unquote client that we're seeking to serve? How can our activities mirror the realities of the communities that we're seeking to work with. And so these are a couple of books. We did a lot of work with consultants and reading books and learning as a staff around things like a learning organization, and this other book around organizing for complexity. These are all sorts of different. If you're working on an MBA, you probably have language far better around this than I do. But I think as a staff, these concepts of being able to take inputs from the communities and the world around us and to figure out how we can more rapidly respond to them is something that really started to get us thinking. Some of you might be probably more aware than I am in the tech sector, this whole concept of agile, and particularly in software development and coding, this idea of agility. What does it mean to have agile practices? Well, there's a whole bunch of folks in the world who talk about this approach around business agility. And even though we're a nonprofit, in some ways, these concepts really resonated with us as well. And so thinking about our leadership styles, how we were looking for leadership to be able to emerge from different parts of the organization, being clear about the type of people that we're working with and our staff, and how we're trying to empower them to be able, those closest to the work, to be able to make decisions. And a culture that was really clear about what's important to us, and having practices and principles sort of backing that up, so we can all be clear on what it is we're trying to be as an organization. This is from a website that Agile Business is a great resource, as is this is the Agile Business Consortium. This is another resource that they had that really resonated with me around even things like feedback, how it's important to not just have feedback loops from the external world of what's working and what's not, but also on the individual level. So how can we as staff members be better at giving each other sort of quick and direct and helpful feedback? How could we develop that practice and making it so that we're feeling like we're investing in each other and supporting each other to learn and grow as professionals, and to help us continue to be more impactful in our work? So what did we do? Well, we did a lot of things. We got really excited about this concept. And to be honest, I think in not all of the ways that we tried to incorporate these ideals and values worked in the ways that we thought that they would. But some of the things that did work, I wanted to be able to share with you. So part of this approach is to say, you need to better understand your client and understand how you're integrating that into your structure. So along the coast of Maine, we see folks wearing many different hats. That means we use that phrase all the time. We don't know how many hats they actually wear, but they work on a lot of different issues. And they're able to see the connections between issues and sort of the point of intersect, or the point of influence, that allows you to maybe even tick more than one box by talking about more than one issue at once. As I said at the outset, we oftentimes get to be these sort of technocratic, sort of siloed mindsets of being the expert in one thing. And at the Island Institute, that's how we were organized. In many ways, we had essentially 6 different little mini nonprofits working on little different, on particular issue areas. We made a change to move from having staff serving on only one issue area to a model where we now actually have staff working on 2 to 3 different issue areas where there's generally some form of intersect. Oftentimes it's a community member. Communities maybe work on issues, in sort of little bundles. And so our staff in some ways will have an intersect of something like broadband and sea level rise, which might seem totally different, but the idea that municipalities along the coast are trying to figure out the technical feasibility of solutions and find the funding for them, make the capital investments, it's the same decision-making process in many ways for those issues. And so perhaps we might have a person on both of those teams, and maybe they serve on one of our leadership teams where they're actually developing some of the skills trainings and programs that can support those municipal leaders as well. We're also much more clear about how our work actually intersects, and how, we might be launching a program to pilot electric outboard motors. That's a piece of work that our Blue Economy team, Our climate mitigation team and our workforce pathways team is actually collaborating on together. So we have more purposeful intersections of our work where we can bring more organizational resources to solving an issue than previously. I feel like our communities that we work with are oftentimes future focused and values driven. I tell people that on Monhegan, when there was discussion about a submarine cable to connect the island to the offshore wind turbine, there was immediately a question of, well, how long is it going to be there for? And people said, oh, 20 years, we finance these projects for 20 years. The project is going to operate for 20 years. I feel like in Rockland, I don't really think too far ahead in terms of 20 years. 20 years, I don't know what I'm doing in 20 years. What I've found in island communities is 20 years could be like tomorrow. People are concerned about the future. They can see, they need to see how things are going to play out. And not necessarily specifically, we don't need to have a specific plan of exactly this will happen in the next 20 years. But we need to have a sense of what's important to us and how that will continue to persist in a time period. So organizationally, we have done a couple of things. As I mentioned, we recently launched a strategic planning process where we decided actually to make it a little bit different and actually have framed it as a strategic framework that allows us to have some flexibility. We have some pretty clear protocol for evaluating our goals on an annual basis. It gives us a sense as to where we're going between now and 2030, but an opportunity to evaluate on an annual basis to say that if the world around us is changing, then we need to change and alter some of our plans as well. So I think in some ways, it's important to know kind of where you're heading, but also to be able to adjust and to carry some core values as opposed to necessarily very specific outcomes that need to emerge. While we're focused on the future, we also really need to be attentive to today's challenges. And one of the things we've done is instituted a number of systems internally, including a weekly meeting that allows us to bring all of the heads of our program work together and to talk about what's emerging that we hadn't expected along the coast of Maine. This could be work related to our work and our particular programming, or it could be sort of outside of it. But because we're trying to understand the landscape or the sort of pulse of the coast of Maine, we're trying to understand where is change potentially emerging in ways that we hadn't expected. Where are there challenges that are going to sap people's attention and capacity to address the issue that they were working on last week? Where is the need for us to try to make deeper sense of little pieces of changes that we're seeing happening? We talk about this practice of sense making so that we can sort of start to see patterns and trends throughout our work as well. And so that allows us to kind of pivot from feeling totally reactive to crises that show up and being a little bit more aware of maybe what's brewing out there. And the last thing I would say is that we're trying to show up for each other in communities. We rarely have a community where one person is in charge of everything. I think the ability of individuals in small communities to lean into an issue may ebb and flow with other things happening in their lives, as does the need for that within any organization. And so we made some very explicit changes to our organizational structure that allows for leadership to emerge from different parts of the organization. By really expanding the role of our project management staff to making sure that key sort of strategic endeavors of the organization have representation from different levels of the organization as well, really looking for this concept of shared leadership to emerge. So recognizing that not only do the issues change, as I said in the quote at the outset, we need to be prepared to change as well. And I think that's what the Island Institute has been trying to do over the last few years. Finally, David asked me to offer a couple of observations for those of you in the research space and universities. We've had the great fortune to work with a number of students, whether through collaboration we have with the College of the Atlantic through the Fund for Maine Islands. That's part of the picture here. On Samsu Island in Denmark, we have island community leaders alongside COA students and the founder of the Samsu Energy Academy in Denmark. I think universities are really well situated to be successful in this type of work because the place-based partnership is core to who you are. You're based in place. And I think being able to understand local needs and be attentive to them is a key piece in our ability to respond to everything that's going on in the world around us. The challenge is to be there for the long haul, right? So instead of 12-week terms, we've got 12 years of change. So what are the ways in which universities can invest in centers, perhaps like the Mitchell Center, that have sort of a longer period of a relationship, that have students bring value to that and kind of come in and out? We've definitely seen students can add a lot of value, but you need to make sure we position the student contribution or the research contribution in the appropriate way. In this particular partnership, at first, I think some of the Islanders said, oh, we've got some students, they can go do some research and kind of do some technical design for us on some of these issues. And we said, you know, they're doing this for 12 weeks and, you know, they might not be PhDs at this point. And so let's make sure we're kind of making sure the engagement, not just from a time perspective, but sort of a skill level, is appropriate and the expectations are clear. We feel that students bring a lot of energy and enthusiasm and a sort of newness to topics. We've had a lot of luck with students doing interview work to collect information that is really helpful insights. Where, you know, perhaps it's not as intimidating as maybe sitting with a reporter, for example. There's a lot that can be gained, I think, by engaging students in this work. And the last thing I would say is you all have the opportunity to help tell the story of what's going on and how do we add up and sort of find themes and frameworks for what's happening on the ground. I've always appreciated working with students and PhDs to document our work, get it published in the literature. It helps to put the coast of Maine on the map and helps us to identify who else we can learn from and ideally, hopefully bring some of our insights to bear as well for other communities that are seeking to navigate change. So I know David wanted to leave some time for questions, but I hope that was some helpful insight, not just into some of the issues that we're dealing with here on the coast of Maine, but different ways that we might try to reset our thinking a little bit. These days, the challenges we have these days are heavy and difficult, and perhaps they are not inspiring. But I think when we can find new ways to come at it, if we can muster a little bit more energy and creativity, I think that there's a lot of opportunity that we can unlock together along the coast of Maine and beyond. So I do have a couple of resources of things that have been helpful to us. And other than that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thanks, Linda.
Suzanne, let's give her a hand. Can we give her a hand? That was just the most wonderful talk. You can't necessarily see us doing that, but Suzanne, we learned so much. David, should I go ahead or do you want to say a few things?
No, why don't you go first? I have my own questions, but I'll try to save them. And if anybody in the room here has questions, raise your hand. Ruth will bring over a microphone so everybody can hear it. But why don't you go first, Linda, please?
Okay, and you can hear me okay?
Just fine, thanks. How about
Great.
you? Can you hear fine, Suzanne?
Great. So Suzanne started us out by saying, well, first giving us a sense of all the things that the Island Institute is doing and the importance of connecting knowledge with action. But then she said, we're going to go behind the curtain and you're going to see, you know, all the different things that we're doing, which was really what happened. I think it was really quite amazing. She's standing, speaking of going behind or seeing things behind, she's standing in front of a map of Maine. And so, Suzanne, if we were to look at that map and how long the coast is, and if we were new to Maine, we were, say, a student who came to Maine because we knew Maine would be an interesting place, are there things you would immediately say we should think about in looking at that map?
Yeah, you know, right before I presented, I actually took out a slide that has a really interesting perspective on that. I'll see if I can get it up really quickly. One thing I would just say is the coastline is enormous, right? I think it depends on how you measure it, but it's typically in the top 3, 4, 5 coastlines in the country. And somebody shared with me the other day that just the coastal town of Harpswell's coastline is a pretty significant percentage of the state of Rhode Island. And so again, I really mean it. Cities like Boston dealing with sea level rise, or all of these issues that have the capacity to sort of address from an infrastructure perspective, how can we possibly have that amount of resource available to us in a rural, small state like Maine? For a topic like offshore wind, we have, one of the most significant fisheries in the country. I think lobster has been the most valuable species landed for quite some time. The vast majority of lobster licenses are in Maine. And when you're talking about any marine or fishing related issue, then the number and the sort of geographic spread of that activity is just enormous. And so I think from a resource perspective, there's a lot more going on here. So yeah, I would really suggest to folks that if they're interested in this question, to check out our waypoints series on our website. It's our community indicator sort of census for the coast, but actually tracks some really interesting trends from a socioeconomic perspective and infrastructure perspective of how the coast of Maine compares to the rest of the state and to the rest of the country.
Oh, that's very helpful and very interesting. One of the key themes throughout your important talk is that place-based work is so important, that you can't do the same thing in one place necessarily that you do in another. On the other hand, we need to learn from each other, that if we only focus on our space, we really have struggles. So do you have a lesson or some advice for all of us in terms of how we deal with that contradiction, in a sense, that we need to be place-based, but we really need to learn from places that are quite different from what we're like?
Yeah, we deal with that all the time. I think, when there's just been, my community is different. That won't work in my community. I couldn't do that. And that oftentimes is the case. There oftentimes is a unique barrier or a unique set of conditions. But I think if you get people in the room, people always find there's more in common than they think there is. So it's just a little bit of having a open mindset to being able to come together. And it may not be the specifics, I remember there was a chocolate company in Idaho, and I had a friend tell me on Monhegan, well, I can't have a chocolate company on Monhegan. And sure enough, a chocolate company did sprout up on Monhegan. But, there could be specific barriers, but I think the sort of personal experience can oftentimes resonate, how you navigate drama in your community, how you sort of deal with, talking to a bank about getting a loan. These are all things that the specifics may differ, but some of the experience, and just what I hear over and over again is people are so empowered by realizing that they're not alone. And I think we'll take all of that we can get right now.
Oh, that's really very interesting. It really is. You talked about some very important things about support for storytelling and sense making as being really very useful and very important to the work that you're talking about. And one of the people we have who's listening to you is Michelle De Leon, who's a graduate student and who has just did a piece for the Bangor Daily News about how storytelling is just so important. Are there things that we should be doing differently in the education system to open up that capacity and that interest, and then say coming to your great organization and saying, oh, one of the skills we bring that we'd like to help with is da-da-da?
Yeah, that's great. Michelle was able to do that. There's so many different ways to answer that question. I mean, we're really fortunate at the Island Institute that somehow we publish a monthly newspaper, the Working Waterfront News. We have this data publication that we've started producing that we can tell the story through data and infographics that has been really powerful. We work with great film producers to create our Climate of Change series. And I think, there's kind of a way to position what we're learning for a different audience. So many different, multimedia approaches. One of our multimedia staff actually is a Maine grad, Jack Sullivan, and he's been a great addition to our staff. So I would say, there's a lot of different ways you can use your skill sets on this. From the academic research perspective, I had the chance to work with a PhD student several years ago with our offshore wind work, where, I told you the story, we were seeing all this amazing stuff happen on the ground, and we really wanted to elevate the stories of what the New England Islands were doing, but we didn't. I hadn't been in school for a while, right? And I don't keep up with the academic literature. So it was really great to form a partnership with her to actually come up with some academic frameworks and sort of pull from the literature to, frame up what we were doing and get it published. So we've had a lot of luck with our work ending up in peer-reviewed journals, but oftentimes for us as practitioners, we really need an extra set of hands to help us get through that process.
That's just so important. And you mentioned that one of the challenges is students come and they're great, but they're not there for very long, and sort of that's a challenge. And I know. One thing that I've done a lot with students is actually having them, we do an exercise at the end of the semester, or at the end of a time that they do an internship of sort, where they hand off the baton. Mm-hmm. So where they have to think about, how is somebody going to use this? How does this continue and grow? And that we're all just a piece of the puzzle. We're not the whole kind of puzzle, in terms of things. Out of state visitors.
Yeah.
There are a lot of them. They come because we're a great place.
Yeah.
Do they have any kind of role in terms of what, all the leadership that you're engaged with and thinking about how to use that resource?
Yeah, we're grappling with a lot of the social and economic changes across the state and along the coast. And we've definitely, talked about the sense making throughout the pandemic, been meeting as a staff to say, what does this mean? At the same time, we have the PFA, the people from away. We're also, so many people are trying to talk about equity and inclusion and justice. And, those things are that those perspectives are really in tension with each other. And so this idea of how do we build a more welcoming coast? The state of Maine is having, not just generational visitors in the seasonal, the summertime, but we're seeing people move here from out of state, and it's creating some tensions. But I think, as a state, our economy needs to grow. Our population, our workforce needs to grow. We recognize that Maine is likely to be the location of recipient of a lot of climate refugees. And generally speaking, we think a diverse population is a more resilient population, and that we all benefit from diversity. And so this idea of how we relate to people from away, I think, is really critical for us all to figure out. I think we see every day in communities the ability for people to contribute in meaningful ways, whether they're there year round or participating in a town meeting over Zoom or playing a volunteer role on a board, maybe supporting local initiatives financially. I think it comes down to those values. If we're invested in place, in the resiliency of place, we share the same values, and it doesn't matter where we grew up. I think that part we could maybe drop.
People are writing in saying things like, it's great to learn more about the Institute. People are really responsive to what you've had to say and the importance of it. And David, I have a couple more things, but if you have things right there in the room.
No, we're okay here, Linda, but we are at time. So
Okay. Okay. Can
Yep.
I say just one more
you
thing?
bet. Yep.
You mentioned some books that you're using, then we should read. Are there any book clubs going on in Maine that would help us all read these together and learn from each other?
I'm not reading am I reading any books on this right now? I'm not reading any books on this right now. Anything on Peter Senge's learning organization or business agility, I would definitely check out. One resource that I really enjoy is called Network Weaver. There's a blog and a website. There's some things on social media that really think a lot about this relational approach. And I definitely suggest folks check that out. June Hawley is the woman who sort of started that area of work.
Thank you so much for giving this opportunity to learn from you. And can we give her a hand again?
You bet. Yep.
Thank you.
Suzanne, it's obvious we could keep talking to you for a long time, and I'm going to encourage everybody to follow up with you that would like to do that. Okay?
Absolutely. Happy to do it. And we do look for interns. Like I said, we have the Island Fellows program. Happy to find ways to collaborate. But thanks for the invite to join you all.
Oh, thank you.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Linda.
Yeah.